Hi students, and welcome to another video of our course in programming here at the HTBLA Leonding. Originally I didn't plan for this video, but in this week's course, when I discussed with your second teacher who will teach you the basics about the C programming language, we found out that he would like to make you use Ubuntu Linux. And I think that's an awesome idea, and I invite you also to use Ubuntu Linux for your .NET development. So I thought I will summarize how to install Ubuntu Linux on your Windows machines first, and second, how to prepare them for the use of C# and C. So this video will be about the Windows subsystem for Linux. Now you see, the Windows subsystem for Linux is one of the easiest way to get Linux onto your Windows box. Most of you are using Windows boxes, only a few have macOS machines. So if you have a Windows machine and it's a decent it's a current version of Windows 10 or a version of Windows 11, you have access to the Windows subsystem for Linux. Here you see the documentation of the Windows subsystem for Linux. What the Windows subsystem for Linux essentially does, it runs the Linux kernel side by side to your Windows kernel. So without installing some kind of virtual machine software and manually setting up a virtual machine or implementing dual boot on your machine, something like this, you don't need all this stuff. Just enable the Windows subsystem for Linux and you are good to go. You always have the Linux system and the Windows system running seamlessly side by side, and they work really nicely together. And in this video, I would like to summarize how to install the Windows subsystem for Linux. We did that together this week during the course, but maybe you have to reinstall your machine in the upcoming months and you can't remember how we did it. So let me quickly summarize that, and then I will show you a bunch of interesting tips what you should do with the Windows subsystem for Linux to get started. First, let's talk about the installation of the Windows subsystem for Linux. Here you see the documentation page of the installation of Linux in the WSL. Now, the Windows subsystem for Linux in general can be all installed with a single command. You see the command here. In 80% of the cases, my experience, this simply works. You only have to install and run this one just as it is described here, but in some cases you might run into problems. We saw problems in the class on your computers, especially if you are running a user which is not an administrator on the box you are on. So make sure to sign in with a local administrator user and run also the PowerShell or Windows command prompt in which you run the statement as an administrator. That one is important. If you don't do that, the installation will fail. Once you installed the WSL, you can follow the installation or the description here. Here you see how to install a so-called Linux distribution. A Linux distribution is the shell and the tools and so on that sit on top of the Linux kernel and make the Linux kernel usable for you as a developer. In our case, please use Ubuntu as the distribution name to make sure that everybody is running the same distribution. Once you get more experienced, feel free to choose a different distribution if you like. Absolutely no problem. When we installed the WSL on your machines in the class, some of them, 2 or 3, they continuously failed when running this command. Therefore, I would like to show you another way of installing these tools through the GUI, through the graphical user interface of Windows. What you can do is you can enter the settings as you see here, go to apps, and in apps you can take a look at optional features. You see here optional features, and here if you scroll very much down you see more Windows features. If you do that, you get this nice little dialog here, and if I scroll down I have 2 very important checks that you have to set. The first one is the virtual machine platform. Don't worry, you don't have to install a virtual machine manually, but you need this enabled. And here you see the Windows subsystem for Linux. By setting these two boxes, pressing OK, waiting a little bit, you can also install the Windows subsystem for Linux. Once you have the Windows subsystem for Linux, you can use the Microsoft Store in your Windows installation. Let me show you that one. I bring it to the correct screen here. Here it is. And here you can look for Ubuntu, for instance, because we are going to use Ubuntu as our distribution of choice, at least in this course. And here you can simply click on Ubuntu and you can install Ubuntu directly out of the Microsoft Store. So this is the graphical way of installing the Windows subsystem for Linux and the Ubuntu distribution. I hope that one of these two ways will work on your computer. If not, come to me or come to some other teachers here at the HTL and we will help you overcome any problems. Nice, so now we have installed Ubuntu. What should we do with it? How can we start it? How can we interact with it? Before I show you how to work with the Ubuntu system, with Ubuntu running in the WSL, in the Windows subsystem for Linux, let me give you another very important tip. If we go into the store again, the Microsoft Store, I highly recommend that you install another tool which is crucial for working with Windows nowadays, I think. And that is the Windows Terminal. Here you see the Windows Terminal. The Windows Terminal is awesome when it comes to having a tool to interact with your command prompt, with your Windows command shell, with Ubuntu and so on. So I highly recommend to install the Windows Terminal, or if you want to have the newest, latest and greatest preview features, you can of course give it a try and run the Windows Terminal preview. It depends on whether you like to run preview software or whether you prefer to have production software on your machine. Once you have everything set up, you can easily start Ubuntu by just looking for Ubuntu in your Start menu. I will start it here on my machine, and that will bring up Ubuntu, and here I am. I am in my machine, and Ubuntu is running. Everything is fine. Now, by default, I'm here in my home directory. I called my user Rainer. This is my name, and this is the home directory. In your case, it might be a little bit different. Now, in this video, I will not show you the basics of working with the shell, in this case bash. You have different courses, other courses in your HTL where you learn the basics of managing the Linux operating system. However, I will show you some tips, some survival tips that you might need in order to be successful with your Windows subsystem for Linux. First, you should create a folder in which you gather all the different exercises that you do in this course. For instance, you could say, let's create a directory. mkdir stands for make directory, and call it HTBLA Leonding, or whatever you like. If you are not in the HTL and you're just following this course online, absolutely no problem. Choose any name that you prefer. With cd, change directory, you can move or navigate into that directory. Now we have an empty directory and we can create an empty folder for our first experiments here in the Windows subsystem for Linux in Ubuntu. And let's start with an experiment using C#. So let's say mkdir, make directory, C#. Call it hello C#. That's good. Now on my machine, I can already say .NET and I will not get an error that .NET is missing because I have already installed .NET on my Ubuntu machine. That is an important one. If you have installed .NET on your Windows box, you have to understand that the Windows subsystem for Linux and the Ubuntu distribution is something different. You have to reinstall, you have to install .NET on your Windows subsystem for Linux box too, on your Ubuntu machine. That's not automatically spilling over from Windows into Linux. That doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. Well, how do you install a tool like .NET? Well, the easiest thing to install .NET in Ubuntu is to go to .NET. That's the, let's say, landing page for getting .NET. I will write it down again so you can remember it. It's .net. Okay, this is the website. Then we can go to download. Then we can choose all versions. Here is all versions. And then we see all the different versions. .NET 7 is the latest standard time support. It's the latest production version currently available. And there is .NET 8, which is a release candidate version. It's not already there. It will become live in November. So feel free to choose one of those. In the .NET course, you can choose either .NET 7 or .NET 8. I really don't care, whatever you prefer. When I click on one of the versions and I scroll down a little bit, you see that there is a separate instruction area. Here it is. How to install Linux, how to install .NET on Linux. We need the SDK, and I can simply click on this link, and that will bring me to the documentation of how to install .NET on Linux. And if I scroll down a little, you will see that we can choose between manual installation and scripted installation. Scripted installation is obviously simpler. The scripted installation is very, very simple. All you need to do is to follow these few very simple steps. You say, say webget with a URL. This downloads an install script onto your Ubuntu machine. Then you have to make it executable. Change mod +X means that the script should be executable on your machine, and then you can simply run it. By default, you can say latest, and that, as of today, will give you .NET 7. Okay. You can also install a different version by choosing another channel here. If you want to have full control over what's going on and you don't want to have a magic script doing changes to your system, you can go to manual installation. If I scroll down, you will see how this works, and this will be a little bit more complicated. There is a third version, particularly for Ubuntu. If I choose, for instance, my Ubuntu version here, I can scroll down, and you see that if you add some package sources from Microsoft, just copy this into your Ubuntu machine. If you have that, you can easily install .NET by running this simple command. Okay? I would say if you are new to Ubuntu and if you don't know exactly what's going on, I highly recommend that you use the scripted install thing. So run this command, run that command, run this command, and finally you should be done. Yeah? You should be done. You have the SDK and you can immediately try to run everything. So that should work fine. Good. So that is the installation of .NET. How to get the C tooling that you need to follow along in the C part of your course. Well, there is an Ubuntu package which is called Build Essential. This is Build Essential. This is the name of the package, Build Essential. And this is what you have to install. Well, how do you install this package? You run two very simple commands. Let me go into my shell here. You simply say sudo, which gives you super user execution permissions, super user do if you want, and you say apt update. That's the first one. This will, after I entered my password, this will go into the internet and refresh the list of installable packages which are available to your Linux instance. So this is the first statement that you need to execute. The second statement is a sudo apt install build essential. That will install the C compiler on your machine. In my case, nothing was changed because I already have the C compiler installed and build essential was already installed on my machine. So let me quickly recap that. The first one was a sudo apt update. That's the first one. And the second one was a sudo apt install build essential. That will give you all that you need for this course in terms of C. So that will give you the C compiler. So if you haven't done it yet, stop the video here, pause the video and install the latest version of .NET and install the Build Essential package on your Ubuntu machine to make sure that your Windows subsystem for Linux is ready for the C# course and the C part of this course at the HTBLA Leonding. Welcome back. I hope the installation went fine. Now let's talk about how you can write C# and C programs. You might think that you now have to install Visual Studio Code on your Ubuntu machine, but that is not necessary in fact. Because Visual Studio Code knows a very nice trick. Visual Studio Code enables you to run Visual Studio Code as usual on your Windows machine on top of the Windows kernel with all the graphical GUI goodness that Windows brings to the table, but still let the whole execution process, build process and everything run inside of VSL, of the WSL. And I'm going to show you how that works. For that, we can simply start Visual Studio Code directly here in the Windows subsystem for Linux. And you do that in exactly the same way as you would do it on Windows. If you do it on Windows, you start a command line, and in the command line you say code dot in order to open the current folder in Visual Studio Code. And here we do exactly the same. We run code dot, and that will bring up Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code will have the folder in the Ubuntu machine open. Now, how does that work? Or how can you make that work? There is a very important extension, and you might need to install it first before it really works in Visual Studio Code, and that's the WSL extension. So please go on and install the WSL extension. And that does what exactly that line, this tagline tells you. Open any folder in the Windows subsystem for Linux and take advantage of Visual Studio Code's full feature set. This is awesome. This is a thing of beauty. I love it. I use it every single day. I mean, take a look, 21 million votes and 5 stars. I think it's pretty clear that this thing is useful. So I highly recommend that you install it. Now for C#, you know what you have to do. For C#, you have to install the C base language support and you have to install the C# dev kit. I already told you about that in the previous in the previous lecture. And for C, you can take a look. There is an extension pack. It's called C++ extension pack. Here it is. It's provided by Microsoft, and it gives you all that you need in order to successfully develop and debug and things like that, C programs in Visual Studio Code. So these are the 3 extensions that I recommend that you install. 4 extensions, in fact. WSL, C#, C# dev kit, and C++ extension pack. This is what, if you ask me, is the minimum set of extensions that you should install on your machine in order to make everything work. So let's give it a try. So I'm here in an empty folder, Hello C#. You see, if I open the terminal, we see the typical Ubuntu Linux prompt, no longer a Windows prompt. We can now say .NET New Console. The .NET New command now runs on Linux, not on Windows anymore. So don't get a wrong impression. This really runs on Linux, not on Windows. So if I click here, you see it looks good, and I can simply say .NET run or debug it or do whatever I want. Everything is ran and executed in Linux, no longer in Windows, but my Visual Studio Code still runs on top of Windows. Very, very useful. Now you might ask yourself, oh, how do I access these files? I mean, the folder that we are currently in is a folder in your Linux system. If you spin up the file explorer, something like this here, let me fold that up so it's easier to see. Here it is. Okay, good. here we are. If you open it up here and you try to access this folder directly, you will simply not find this folder. So how can you explore the folder with your Windows Explorer and do drag and drop operations, for instance, because you might need to copy something from your download folder, or maybe you have to drag and drop something onto the GitHub website, or whatever you have to do. There is a really nice trick for that. Directly here inside of Visual Studio Code or any shell that runs the Windows subsystem for Linux, you can directly run Windows software from Ubuntu, and that's awesome. Let me give you an example. I can start the calculator by simply saying calc.exe, and see, the calculator comes up. That's magic, isn't it? That's Harry Potter programming, a little bit of fairy dust, and it simply works. We are in Linux and we run a Windows executable and it comes up. And the same is true for the Windows Explorer. You can simply say explorer.exe and then specify that it should open the current folder, just something like this. And this will bring up the Windows Explorer, and guess what? Here you have all your files directly in the Windows Explorer, and up here you can also see the path which you could have used if you would have known it. But yeah, it's much easier if you simply type, as you've seen it before, explorer.exe, and you are good. Isn't that awesome? I think it's awesome. I hope you like what you see here. So, .NET, check. It simply works. Now let's check, what about C? So go one directory up, create a new directory. Let's call it Hello C. Hello C, here it is. And then start Visual Studio Code again. Now this time I will show you a very simple Hello World program in C. I'm not covering the C part. This is done by my colleague, by your other professor here at the HTBLA Leonding. I will simply show you that the tools work. So let's create a hello.c file. And in this hello.c file, we'll do an include standard.io.h. Define a main method, something like this, and inside of the main method we simply say put s, which is put string on the console, hello world, something like this, and semicolon, and we should be good. That is the hello world example in C. And now if we want to compile this thing, we can use different C compilers. There is not just one C compiler, but there are many C compilers. I'm going to use the GCC here, the GCC compiler, and it looks like this. You can say gcc hello.c and specify an out file, which should be hello, which is just an executable without an extension. This is how it works under Linux. And if I, let's do it like that. If I list all the files, you will see that the generated hello file is executable. You see here, it's executable. So therefore we can simply say ./hello, and that will execute the program. It says hello world, and we are super happy because we just have proven that C development under Linux with the Windows subsystem for Linux within Visual Studio Code works like a charm with IntelliSense and all the other things. See, if I type in printf, something like this, I can hover over the method. I will see some documentation about the method. It is really a nice developer experience. Of course, you can tailor the system to your specific needs, and there is a lot to say about how to work with C and C compilers, but this is not the topic of this video. I think I have fulfilled my task here. You have learned how to install the Windows subsystem for Linux, how to install the Ubuntu distribution. I showed you how to make basic setup steps in your Ubuntu distribution, meaning especially installing the C# SDK, installing the build essential package in order to get the C compiler. And last but not least, I showed you a bunch of tricks, how you can work with Visual Studio Code for a really nice developer experience. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I showed you how to run Windows programs like the Explorer in order to interact with the files on your Windows subsystem for Linux disk. I hope this video was useful, and I wish you nice coding. Thank you and goodbye. See you.